I knew what I had to do first. Back in my office, I telephoned Chief Inspector Snout at Scotland Yard. Ronald Snout was the head of a department which dealt with contraband goods. I knew him well because he was a great friend of my father's. Also, Snout and I once collaborated on another case of mine which involved the smuggling of human organs for transplants. Snout himself answered the telephone.
"Richard! How nice to hear from you."
We chatted for a while, and then I told him that I had something for him. I asked if we could meet later that day at Dirty Dick's Cafe, only a few yards from Scotland Yard. Dirty Dick's is open 24 hours a day and is well known for its enormous English breakfasts. Eggs, bacon, sausages, tomatoes, and anything else you ask for, which they will serve you at any moment of the day or night. It is much used by policemen who are going on or off duty around the clock. We agreed to meet there at 6. Then I lay on the sofa in my office to go over things in my mind. Some people are good lateral thinkers. I, personally, am a horizontal thinker. At least, when I'm not drinking my special coffee mixture, I think better when I'm lying down. I wanted to put things together because I wanted to tell Snout as much as possible. I started to revise everything I knew, from the newspaper reports about the inheritance case a year before, to my conversations with Selina and my visits to her house. The boys' inheritance, a furniture company in Bangkok, and a lot of the precious stones which are smuggled into Europe come from Asia and Africa. The boys were talking to foreign men in a pub, possibly Asians, Selina said. The boys probably still had keys to the house. The fact that they didn't have keys to the front gate worried me a little. Were the security men members of the gang? I arrived at Dirty Dick's a little early. I sat down at a table and ordered a pot of tea. 10 minutes later, Ronald Snout arrived. He looked just the same as he always did, in his late 50s, but tall and slim, with an athletic build, a luxuriant but well-trimmed moustache, and very well dressed. He looked more like a company director than a policeman. We greeted each other, and he ordered tea and 2 scones. Once he was seated, and after chatting for a couple of minutes, I told him the whole story. I started from the moment that Selina came into my office. He listened without comment. A good policeman must be a good listener. Ronald was very interested, of course, in what I had to say. He knew all about the Willing family, but he had no idea what the boys were doing. We talked about the best way to deal with this case. One possibility was to arrest the brothers immediately and interrogate them, but we agreed that this wasn't the best way to do it. They might not say who their accomplices were, and, anyway, these might leave the country the moment they found out that the boys were in the hands of the police. Finally, we decided to try to catch them, the boys and their accomplices, in flagrante delicto. That is, when they were in the basement cutting open the cushions. We decided that I should stay at Selina's house again that night, and for more nights if necessary. Ronald asked me if I thought the gang were armed. I said I had no idea. In case they were, Ronald decided to have a group of armed policemen near the house during the night, prepared to force the security men to open the gate. If I heard noises, I had to telephone Ronald immediately on my mobile telephone. His men intended to move quickly up to the house. By that time, I had to be downstairs with the front door open and my hand on the lever in the fireplace. We said goodbye outside the cafe, and I went back to my office. I telephoned Selina to tell her I wanted to stay at least another night in her house. Then I told her that something might happen that night, and that I wanted to stay in her bedroom until I went to call her. She agreed. As a precaution, I asked her to instruct the gardener not to let the tigers out that night, but to give them each their half a cow and leave them in their cages. She agreed to that as well. She wanted to know what was going on, of course, but I told her I would tell her later. I arrived at Selina's house at about 11. The security guard let me in without any questions. From one or two jokey comments he made, I understood that he thought that I was Selina's boyfriend. The pretty little maid let me into the house. Selina was already in bed. I was hungry, and I asked the maid to bring me a sandwich and a Coke. I sat in the living room and looked at the fireplace. I was looking forward to a little action. At about 11:30, I went upstairs to bed. Before I went to sleep, I telephoned Snout to make sure that everything was ready. He told me not to worry. He and his men were ready and waiting, hidden in a side road only 200 yards from the house. I fell asleep immediately without taking my clothes off, just my shoes. At 1 o'clock, I was woken up by the same noises as the night before. I put my shoes back on and telephoned Snout. Then I left the bedroom, and the noises stopped. I went downstairs and opened the front door. I waited in the living room. After a few minutes, I heard cars on the drive. A few seconds later, Snout and 6 policemen, armed with pistols and torches, came into the living room. Snout looked at me and nodded. I pushed the lever in the fireplace downwards. The 6 policemen rushed into the open doorway and down the stairs. Snout and I followed. Before I reached the bottom stair, I heard 2 shots. When I arrived in the room, it was brightly lit by the oil lamps. I saw that one of the policemen was wounded in the arm. One of the 5 other men in the room, one of the Asians, was lying on the floor with a bullet in his leg and a pistol beside him. The 2 brothers were there, unarmed, astonished, and very frightened. The 2 other men, both obviously Asians also, had pistols in their hands, but with 5 armed policemen with their weapons pointed at them, they didn't seem very sure what to do with them.
"Drop the guns!"
ordered Snout. The pistols fell to the floor. All that was left to do was to handcuff the members of the gang and take them to the cars which were waiting on the forecourt, and then to take possession of the gems. The uncut cushions were also carried to the cars and loaded into the boots. 2 ambulances were called for the wounded men. Snout and I spoke for a minute or two before they all left. He told me that they would interrogate the men some time later. He promised to telephone me after that. I went upstairs and knocked on Selina's door. She was awake, of course, and I told her everything. "No ghost," I said. "Just some villains making a dishonest living." She seemed relieved, but a bit disappointed. I think she quite liked having a ghost in the house. I told her I would ring her later, after I talked to Snout. Snout telephoned me about 2 o'clock that afternoon. He told me that during their interrogation, the brothers confessed everything. Snout said that they were like two frightened little boys. They were first offenders, so they had no experience of being questioned by police authorities. The Asians were more difficult, obviously hardened criminals, but they were caught red-handed and the police had all the evidence they needed to prosecute them. Snout also told me that the two night security men were also in custody. They were paid by the rest of the gang to open the gate and help to carry the cushions up the driveway to the house. The other three security men were clean. They knew nothing about it. Then, because there were some things I didn't have clear, I asked Snout some questions. For example, how did the boys know about the secret room?
They found it when they were only kids, while they were playing in the living room. They decided to keep it a secret, their private place that no one else knew about. One night, a few months ago, while Miss Willing was in the United States on business, they carried the table down there. They needed a surface to cut open the cushions.
And how did this operation start, I wanted to know.
Well,
said Snout,
2 or 3 months after they received their inheritance, the brothers went to Bangkok. They wanted to see the factory. They were there about 2 weeks. Somehow they got involved with a group of local people. You have met 3 of them. One is Burmese, by the way, and the other 2 Thais. These people are, in fact, experienced jewel smugglers, but the brothers didn't know that at the time. And the idea for this operation came from them, not from the brothers. Now, the brothers are pretty simple-minded, frankly. They were taken out to dinner several times to good restaurants by these nice people. Always invited, always paid for. After that, I think that it was easy to persuade them to take part in the scheme. Now the company makes furniture from teak, and the accompanying cushions. So the plan was that the brothers return to London with the 3 Asians, which they did. After that, a small group of local people, in the pay of the smugglers, began to enter the factory late at night, 2 or 3 nights a week. Their job was to make the cushions, and into every 3rd one, before they lined it, they put a bag of precious stones. They marked these cushions with a tiny X on the bottom surface. Then, together with other furniture which the company made, they were exported to England to be stored in the company warehouse in West Kensington. So when each consignment arrived, the brothers and the 3 other men visited the warehouse at night and filled a van with all the cushions marked with an X. They then drove to Miss Willing's house in Surrey. They arrived between 11 and 12. It was the brothers' idea to store the stones in their secret room.
And then, when they got to Selina's house?
Well,
said Snout,
they couldn't drive the van up the drive, too much noise. So the guard on duty opened the gate and the 6 men carried the cushions up the drive to the front door. Then, before they opened the door, the guard returned to the gate. One of the brothers then opened the front door and went quickly and quietly to open the secret door. A second later, the other men went into the house as quickly and as quietly as possible with the cushions, and they all disappeared through the doorway beside the fireplace. They closed the door using the lever inside. The whole operation from opening the front door to closing the door of the secret room took only a few seconds. You and Miss Willing probably heard noises when the men were going in with the cushions. But by the time you got up and started to go down the stairs, everything was all over. The boys said that it is impossible to hear any noise from inside the secret room in any other part of the house. And they stayed there until about 1 in the morning while they were taking the stones out of the cushions. Then they left quietly.
All very impressive, I said. But why didn't Selina and I hear the men when they were going up the drive?
Well, firstly, because they were trying to be as quiet as possible. And secondly, because Miss Willing's bedroom is at the back of the house. It overlooks the back of the garden. Where did you sleep, Richard?
The same, yes. My bedroom overlooked the back too. I didn't think of that. But just one more question, Ronald. Where did the stones come from?
Well, from Burma, actually. There are several gemstone mines in Burma, and they don't seem to be very well controlled. They mine various precious stones, but rubies and sapphires are the most valuable. Now, Burma and Thailand are separated by a natural border, the Moe River. Along this river on the Burmese side are little border towns, and a great number of the stones which are mined are stolen and smuggled to these towns. The two best-known border towns are Mai Sot and Mai Sai. Then the stones are rowed across the river. Sometimes people swim across the river carrying bags of stones into Thailand and the eager hands of the international smugglers. The smugglers pay the Burmese relatively little compared to what they earn by selling the stones in Europe. Oh, and yes, the Burmese also have a pearl farming industry at Mergui in the archipelago of the Gulf of Martaban, to the south of the Burmese mainland. Many of the pearls from there also end up in the border town.
I telephoned Selina next. I said I wanted to see her. She told me to go to the house when I wanted to that day, as she was working at home. I arrived a couple of hours later, about 4 o'clock. We sat in the living room and had tea. I told her all I knew after talking to Snout. She seemed a little sad. "What's wrong?" I asked.
"Well,"
she began,
"I'm a bit sorry for my brothers. I know we don't get on well, but—"
I told her that there was nothing I could do about that. But I cheered her up a little by saying that her brothers might learn a lesson by having to spend a little time in prison. And, anyway, their sentences were sure to be much smaller than those of the 3 Asian ringleaders. Her brothers didn't have police records, and I told her that it was clear to the police that they were used and manipulated by the other gang members.
"I suppose I should pay you, Richard,"
she then said. "That's a good idea," I replied. She went to a chest of drawers, opened a drawer, and took out a checkbook.
"Is a check all right?"
she asked. "Fine," I said. But I didn't go to Selina's house just to tell her what Snout told me, nor to be paid. I had something else on my mind. "Selina, I was wondering, well, the fact is, when I finish a case, I like to go out and celebrate. There's a little French restaurant in Soho. Very good food, excellent fish, and, well, I was wondering if you would like to have dinner there with me tonight." Finally, I said it. Her eyes brightened, and she gave me a beautiful smile.
"I'd love to, Richard."
So we made the arrangements, and I left the house. I wanted to dance down the driveway. The case was solved. I had some money in my pocket, and I had a beautiful girl to take out to dinner that night. Life was treating me well. The last line of one of everyone's favorite old films came to my mind. As I tried to sound like Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, I repeated it to myself. "Yes," I said. "This could be the start of a beautiful friendship."